What's good, YouTube? Pro Jordy is here, and today I am bringing you something exciting, new to the channel here. What we are doing is we are launching our campaign in the Draft League of the DLC. We are going to be here as the head coach of the British Bruxish Draft League team. So, I've played in the DLC now for... this is my second off season. I've played one season of regular season. First off season was just a complete write-off. Less said about that, the better. The regular season that we just finished not long ago, I just missed out on playoffs on literally the final week. It came down to me and a guy called Steven, and it was literally the winner took the last playoff spot. Unfortunately, he beat me on the day. Absolute credit to him. He played amazingly, outplayed me completely, and it was a well-deserved win for him. So we're back in the off-season in what's called 3.5, and we are here and we are looking to get that playoff spot this time. So quick run through. If you don't know what a draft league format is, it's basically a style of tournament where all the coaches or players draft Pokemon like athletes. So there is one Pokemon of every kind in the format. Once one coach takes that, no other coach can use that Pokemon. It's the same as like a real person. They can't play for multiple teams in the same league. There is certain restrictions, ban lists, things like that. Now, for the off-season that we're playing here in this format, normally we play standard OU. In regular season, in the off-season, we vary up the formats. And this one is a national dex. So this means that we can include things like Megas, all the Pokemon which haven't been released in Sword and Shield. So it's such a big and diverse format. And it really showed when we were drafting, because of how much variety and options you had going through. So quick breakdown for how things looked. So what we had was you had a set number of picks. So in our instance we had 11 picks and we were using a point buy system. So what happened was everybody got one Mega Evolution included as a free. You then got a tier 1, a tier 2, two tier 3s, a tier 4 and a tier 5 pick. Now all the Pokemon were split, with tier 1 being the better mons available, and through to the tier 5 is kind of like they're still relevant, but they're just not as impactful as the tier 1 and tier 2s. However, you do find some nice little diamonds in the rough down there that fill in such a nice role in your team, or just have such a good amount of power that they are still considered a big threat. So you then have 4 picks remaining after that, which you have 400 points to spend. Now, tier 1 picks are more expensive and tier 5 picks are the cheapest, and they vary in between 180 and 40 points. You have 400 points, with tier 3 being the average at 100, so in theory you could go and take 4 tier 4 picks, but if you wanted something higher, you have to drop down one of your picks to tier 4 or 5 to be able to take from the higher tiers. So it all balances out, and it's quite a nice little niche way to build your team and think about your team building as you progress through, and long before, because these are the only 11 mons I can use for this entire competition. There is options to trade with other coaches. It's not something I'm going to be looking to do anytime soon until I've at least got a good feel for how this team plays out. So, going into this, before we started, I had a very solid idea of what I was looking to draft. The mons I was looking for, I wanted to run a solid fantasy core straight off the bat, which is a fairy type, a dragon type, and a steel type. That was very set in my mind. I then wanted a very solid hazard setter set in the team, and beyond that I was kind of quite open and just looking to fill in gaps with as and where, for in terms of weaknesses, type coverage, and different roles. The only other two things that I do like to try and pick up somewhere in a draft team is I always like to have an Intimidate user. somewhere in the roster, and I do always like to have someone with access to extreme speed. I just think that they're two nice little niche things that are always worthwhile having, and just nice little tools to have in the back pocket as and when needed. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to the Season 3.5 British Bruxish roster. So, kicking off our roster was our mega pick right at the start. We went with Mega Deancey. Now, Mega Deancey is an absolutely phenomenal powerhouse. I mean, you can look at the stats that I've put there on the screen for you. Its offensive stats are both at 160. Like, it packs a punch. You can't sleep on it. It has some really solid move coverage. Not as much as you'd probably like, but the moves that it does have, as long as it's hitting neutral, it's hitting you hard. And even then, its defensive stats are based at 110 and speed at 110. It's like, all round, the only negative thing about it is the fact that its base HP is so low. That is literally the only negative about this mon I can think of. I mean, it's even a stealth rock setter. It gets cleric moves in terms of heal bell. And even its ability magic bounce is super useful for just bouncing hazards, status back at your opponent. It's all round, I think it was just a really solid pick. Now, I was set 4th in the draft order, and I nearly scrapped off this entire plan because at this point in the draft, the one mon which I expected to go in the first 2 picks was still there. The only reason I didn't go with it, and that was Megalopunny, and the only reason I didn't go with it was because I had done 0 prep for it, because I did not expect it to be there. So I was absolutely stunned, and I think there was a couple of people below me as well were probably in the same boat of thinking, do I take it or do I just run and or do I just ignore it and make sure I've got answers to it? And I bottled it. I'm kind of glad I'm glad I stuck with my guns, because we have drafted what I think is quite a solid team going into this competition. But definitely Mega Deancey is going to be a very good cornerstone that I do have in this team, and was a very clutch thing to pick up right at the start there in the draft. So, second pick, we went straight in at tier 1 after that, and we scooped up Celesteela. Celesteela was my second choice steel type, because there were 16 coaches in the draft. So between me picking Mega Deancey and me getting my next pick, there was 22 picks. So that was it 22? Yeah, about 22 picks. So there's there was very little chance I was going to get exactly what I wanted. My first choice was Heatran. That actually almost made it back to me. I think it was the guy who was only 2 or 3 picks ahead of me in round 2 actually took it. And I was really good when I realised it had gone, because I didn't actually even see it had gone initially, so I thought I'd got it, and then I was told I hadn't, and I was quite upset. But I managed to get Celesteela. I can't really be mad. Celesteela's really solid Pokemon. It's solid walls, and it's got really actually I only realised when I was actually researching to draft it how solid its coverage actually is, because a lot of people run it with standard soul set of your Protect, Leech Seed. Sometimes they'll have heavy slam on it, things like that, and they'll maybe throw on one other random move like a flamethrower. But this thing actually, I was going through the list, and this thing gets Earthquake, Energy Ball, Flamethrower, Stone Edge, Superpower, and Zen Headbutt. So that straight away has so much coverage potential that it just makes it such a solid option. Coupled with the fact that it has all of its stats are around the 100 mark, with the exception of speed, but you don't really mind because it's so bulky. It's such a good set, and it gives a good few options and a good amount of diversity, which is just what you need in the draft format. I was really happy to have that as a steel type, building up the core there. So we had 2/3 of our course straight off the bat on our 2 picks. So pick number 3, I used a paid pick. We didn't have to draft in any specific order, is one thing I need to say. So it came back around to me, and I'd made a conscious decision. I wanted to pick up all of my core from my Mega and my 2 Tier 1 picks, and I was going to buy a Tier 1 pick. When it came around to me, I had 3 choices for the Dragon type. I had Latios or Latias, Garchomp, and I had Kyurem. I went with Latios in the end because I was just looking and I'm thinking, well, out of the other 2, what can I really do? And I was like, well, Garchomp is really fast and a really good hard physical hitter. Latios does pretty much the same thing, just in a special attacking version. And Kyurem, again, it's just a powerhouse. Like, all 3 of them, I don't, like, just all hit hard and really fast. I don't think there's a wrong decision to make out of those 3. And in the end, the thing that swung it for me was Levitate. Just because of the simple fact that by having Latios in there with the Levitate, it meant that I have that ground immunity. And at this point in the draft, I was thinking it gives me the extra immunity. I've got the flying type immunity from Celesteela, but that also then brings in the other weaknesses in terms of electricity. And Levitate was just a nice kind of way to get that ground immunity. When I actually looked at my roster after I finished, I think over half my team is immune to ground types, which was quite an interesting thing to look at. But I mean, Latios is just a real hard hitter. It completed my core, and also as a last little tidbit it can do at the end is it also gets defog, which is all, as everyone knows, is super useful to have. Defog never goes wrong in a team, so it gives me the option to bring a slightly less all-out hyper-offensive version, something a little bit more supporty, and can run the defog option. So pick number 4, we were back on the free picks, and I went down to tier 3. I skipped my tier 2 pick, looking to get that later on. And we scooped up Uxie. Now, again, a Levitate user. You can see what I mean. Is I've got 4 picks and 3 of them are immune to ground types. Now, Uxie is, again, it's a very bulky Pokemon. I unintentionally drafted quite a lot of bulk in this team, which won't go wrong. I mean, most of the mons still hit very hard even with that bulk. But Uxie is literally like an absolute uber support. On top of the fact that she has so much natural bulk in terms of those 130 defensive stats, she also has its setter, she has pivot moves, she has access to support moves like Thunder Wave as well. So, like, it has rocks, Thunder Wave, it can U-turn, it can set screens, it has knockoff. Like, and even then, it's got a 75 base attack and special attack stat, which can't really be sniffed at. It's still going to hit you hard if it has to. So, you know, like, it's not exactly the worst pick, and it's there, and it can fill in so many different roles in the team. So, I was quite happy, and with that was kind of the 4 big things that I wanted straight off the bat. I have my core, I've got my hazards, and support mon. So now I was kind of just into sort of the free reign territory for who I was going to scoop up next. Okay, so that next pick after Uxie came back round, and I was genuinely sat, and I had about 3 or 4 different mons that I was considering at this point. One of the mons I was really thinking about, because I want an electric type and I want a fire type, I was really thinking about Rotom Heat. Now, Rotom Heat got took about 3 or 4 picks before me again. And at that point, I was like, right, there's only really, like, there is the other Rotoms. I did also have Rotom Mo, was a consideration at one point, because there was another Watermon I was looking at in tier 2 at this point. because I was also considering Milotic as my Watermon at this point. But in the end, I ended up dipping into that tier 2 pick and going with the Rotom Wash. It came down to those two, and Milotic just got pipped purely because of the simple fact that this thing has the electric, and guess what? It has Levitate. Again, another thing. I think I'm just looking down the list now. I've got 3 Mons. These 3 Mons I have Levitate. I then still, after this, have another 2 Mons that are part flying type. So I literally have 6 Mons out of my 11 who are immune to ground types. So I don't really care about any of those big scary ground types. But yeah, Rotom it's a very solid typing. It has the immunity there. It gets some nice support moves. It's a defog user. It has Will-O-Wisp. Has the pivot and the Volt Switch, and it can still hit hard with the likes of Thunderbolt, Hydro Pump, things like that. So again, it's a very, very good mon, very solid, and I'm very happy to have managed to pick that up. Okay, so coming into the halfway point in the draft, pick number 6. I had the water type, and I'm like, well, I wouldn't mind a grass and fire type if I can get some decent ones. And then I was still a little bit conscious of the fact I didn't have any Intimidate and I didn't have any E-Speed. I was looking at tier 2 at this point, and Arcanine ticked both those boxes. However, I then spotted Entei was still there. And I decided, well, I ran Arcanine in the regular season last season, and it was alright, but it didn't bring as much as I hoped to the team. So I figured, I'll leave Arcanine, let him sit this one out, and so I brought in Entei. Now, Entei is I've not used it in so long, and that's what's the beauty about this format, is it makes you use mons that you haven't used in a while. It's a very hard hitter. I mean, it's got base 115 physical attack, so it's going to hit you hard. And it has the extreme speed. It does have some reasonable coverage in Iron Head, Crunch, Stone Edge, things like that. And it does have some reasonable bulk to it. I mean, it's got 115 HP and some not so bad defensive stats. So it can take a hit, and it will definitely do some damage in there. One other thing I did notice when I was looking to after I drafted it is it gets some pretty solid weather moves. And so it was after I drafted it, I'd noticed one of them. And that kind of did help tilt me into my next pick when I was looking for a grass type, which was I did notice that this thing does get Sunny Day. And since then afterwards I noticed it does definitely gets Rain Dance, and it definitely gets Sandstorm. So I can definitely run some form of weather control in there if needs be, because I know there was a couple of coaches have drafted rain and sand. So it will give me some options to weather control in there as well with the Entei, which is quite nice. Okay, so pick number 7. Now, this is where Entei did influence a little bit, which was getting Venusaur. So I already drafted the water and the fire type. I was like, it won't hurt to have the grass type, cover all bases with that. And Venusaur was kind of sat there chilling in tier 3, and I was like, well, it wouldn't be the worst. It does have chlorophyll. If I'm going to consider options for weather and have those weather control options, if I am going to be looking to maybe get Sun Up at some point, having chlorophyll Venusaur wouldn't be the worst thing. If not, it still has quite a nice support range. It's mostly, unless that instance comes in, it is mostly going to be there in a support role, using things like its Toxic and Leech Seed. It is a phaser as well with Raw, which is quite useful. But it will be there in mostly in some form of stall and bulky support sort of role. I'm quite happy to have it, but I think it's the one pick where I think it's the one pick I'm having second thoughts about. I feel there is definitely some better grass types out there. Whether or not they're in tier 3 is another matter. Because we did use all of our points up as well, so it's not like I can flick it around and then swap it for a paid pick in a different tier. So I don't know. We'll just have to see what. I mean, it's not the worst mon, it's not the best mon, but I mean that's what happens when you start getting down the lower tiers and you start filling in roles. You've got to use some slightly suboptimal options. But I mean, we could have had a lot worse. We could have had a lot worse. Okay, so the home stretch, all I've got left is tier 4 and 5 picks. So these are now the mons that are very specific roles for the team. Obviously, we still are missing that Intimidate user. And one thing that I clicked before the draft, and I knew 1,000,000% I wanted to run before the draft, was this guy, Honchcrow. It is like literally, it's just such hype mon. Like it flies so far under the radar. People genuinely sleep on it all of the time, and I mean all of the time. It has access to Moxie, which is probably one of the best abilities in the game in my opinion. In terms of being able to build up for a sweep. I mean, if you're pushing for late game sweep, Moxie is one of those abilities you want on your side. Coupled with the fact that it's a 125 base attack and it gets stab, sucker punch. So we don't even need to pay attention to that 71 base speed with sucker punch. It's absolutely nuts. Like, I can't remember. I ran the calcs, and I think, if I remember rightly, I think it's a roll to beat Dracopult. If not, it Okos, if you're running some, depending on the set. And Dracopult is probably the best non-mega in the format. And this thing just one-shots it with a priority move. So, 1,000,000%, it's so good. And obviously it still does massive damage to everything else as well. Like, it kills so much stuff. And it just comes in, and it doesn't even have to, like, sweep a whole team. It can just come in and tear holes in them. Yes, it's not that bulky, so you will be reliant upon that sucker punch. Or any other, like, if you set it up with a speed investment. I have once ran it before. Max speed investment and choice scarf it with Night Slash. That was like back in Gen 6, and that does so much damage as well. Like this, there's so much versatility, and it's such a good offensive mon that if it gets slapped on, like, it will just come in late game and just tear a hole and sweep a team. So I'm super hyped. I think this is probably, after Mega Deontay, this is probably the mon I'm most hyped to have drafted. Okay, this is our last ground type immunity, I promise you. Scyther. Again, another mon which gets slept on in terms of its raw power. Now, Technician, give that nice 50% increase. And it gets, the thing is as well, it's a flying type, so it actually gets a stab aerial ace. So stab aerial ace with the Technician boost puts that to 135 base power. Bug Bite does exactly the same thing. So I've got two moves straight off the bat on a 135 base power with a 110 attack stat on a 105 speed. That's going to do damage. And like that'll just come in, and it's a sort of thing like, if you're neutral or I'm super effective against you, I'm just going to come in, and Scyther's going to really start carving up some damage. And this is where, like, Honchcrow, Scyther, and my last two picks, they come in and kind of cover on type there. Okay, so moving on to our second to last pick here. We finally pick up our Intimidate user down in tier 5. Now, Tauros it's an interesting one because it was on my radar because normally down in tier 5 I scoop up Buffalond. I have done in the off season and also the regular season. There was 2 months I did that in 3 months, that I did that with in both instances. Xatu, Jolteon and Buffalond as low tier picks. I really resisted the urge for these last 2 picks. I had a tier 4 and a tier 5, and I really resisted the urge of picking up Jolteon and Buffalond. Because Buffalond absolutely, it takes a hit and it goes in. And I was like, well, I want something that can do something similar. And my answer came out as Tauros. It has the sheer force and intimidate and even anger point. It has 3 massively relevant abilities. It's got a 110 base speed, 100 base power. And sheer force boosted body slam is not something to shirk away from. Like, this thing will do damage. And the fact it does give me a ghost immunity as well is kind of nice. So yeah, it was a nice little mount to pick up towards the end there, and I was really happy that I managed to get that intimidate user at the end. Okay, so rounding off our roster for the season of the Draft League Championships, we have Rhydon. Now, it came down to I wanted a ground or rock type for that last pick to get that electric immunity in there, and the 2 standouts were Rhydon and Rhyperior, both in tier 4. And I was looking and really torn which one to take, and in the end I settled on Rhydon because I did the breakdown of the stats, and Rhyperior was only 10 high, like 5 or 10 higher in every stat, if any at all. I don't even think it increased in special attack and special defense. It literally only increased by 5 or 10 points in each one. And the fact if I throw an Eviolite on this thing, it jumps to 180, the equivalent of 180 base defense. And then its special defense goes up to like 60 something as well, which is, yes, it's still not brilliant, but it's a lot better than the 45 to 50 that Rhyperior has. So it was definitely something I wanted to pick up as my ground type option. It does also get Rockhead and Reckless as some useful sort of abilities that we can use. But yeah, I mean, even then, it's a 130 base attack and 130 defense with 105 HP. It's got bulk, it's got power, it fits. It gives us that immunity. It ticks all the boxes like we want. Stab Earthquake as well is also very nice to have on a team, which was the other reason I wanted the ground type, a physical ground type. And Rhydon he ticks all the boxes to round off this team quite nicely. So that is our team for the Bruxish this season. I'm looking quite forward to seeing where things progress. I mean, we do have quite a nice roster. We've got our first game coming up this week, where we will be playing Shaka Trainer, who is he's a good friend, and I've played him a few times, both in the DLC and in other competitions. And he is head coach of the I believe it's the Hawaii Raichus, and his team is pretty scary. It's a pretty hyper offensive team from what I saw, so it will be quite interesting to see how we do fare up against that. And it will require some team building because it seems that it's going to be hyper offensive versus quite a substantial amount of bulk. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please drop a like on the video, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you again next time for our first match. Well, it'll be a team building video plus our first match against Shaka Trainer. Ciao.